In our last video, we looked at referencing. This is a key skill we need to use to perform well in the DSE assessment. Every single year, there are a high number of referencing questions. We need to make sure that we can respond to these effectively. In the last video, we talked about how referencing in the DSE always goes backwards. We talked about how if we can identify the pronoun and what it can represent, we can easily find the answers. In today's video, though, we're going to look at when these referencing questions can get a little bit tricky or a little bit more difficult. We're going to be talking mainly about the kind of things that come up in B2, but these do also come up in part A as well. So even if you're planning to take B1, this video will still be useful for you. So let's get into it. Let's talk about challenging our advanced referencing questions. Normally, referencing questions come in the form of a pronoun. It, he, she, they, them, things like this. But there are times when these pronouns are not talking about a single word. So if we take something like he, we know that he is going to be referring to a male human. Nice and easy. What about in a sentence like this? He told me that he hated everything about school. I didn't agree with that. Now, in this sentence, if we get a referencing question about he, that should be fairly simple. It's referring to the other person. But what about that other pronoun? That. What is that referring to? If we go back, is it referring to the school? No, not really. So which part of this sentence is it referring to? Well, the answer, it's referring to the whole thing. It's referring to the idea. And so the first thing we're going to talk about today is how sometimes referencing questions don't talk about a single idea or a single thing. They speak about a whole sentence or clause. We have to think about the pronoun, the referencing word, as being kind of like a suitcase or a box that is representing a whole larger part of the previous idea or sentence. And of course, this is going to be more challenging. So let's get into this. There are two pronouns which kind of represent this more complex suitcase style of referencing. And that is this and that. The main one we need to talk about is this. Often this is used to refer back to an idea. So let's look at this example. Stories are as old as the human race and have been enjoyed throughout history. However, in the 21st century, technology has unfortunately resulted in many people having shorter attention spans. This has forced writers to find new ways to tell stories and blah, 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 blah. So we're going to use the same rule as before, and we're going to move backwards from this. Now, the object could be attention spans, but let's try and do the substitution test on that. We can't. Attention spans has forced writers to find new ways to tell stories. That doesn't really make sense, does it? What this is really referring to is the whole clause. Technology has unfortunately resulted in many people having shorter attention spans. that is the idea that this is representing. It's the whole sentence, the whole idea. Technology has resulted in many people having shorter attention spans, would be the answer. It's basically saying, well, what is the cause in this situation? As you can see, if we get a referencing question with this, we should treat it very, very carefully. This almost always links to this longer whole sentence kind of referencing. It's as if we are packing up an idea and squeezing it down into one word, this, so that the next sentence can run more smoothly. Very tricky. You need to practice them. But the most important thing is you are ready. If you see this in a question, you know what to expect. The other pronoun that can sometimes be a little bit more challenging is that. We use that as referencing for several different types of things. One of the things is if we are referring to a specific statement or an opinion that somebody else has said. Let's look at this example. Some critics argue that guide dogs are becoming less necessary in the age of GPS and smart tech navigation. They believe that digital tools can fully replace the animal's intuition. However, Hong Kong trainers are not sure about that. Blah, 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 blah. So again, we're going to go backwards because it always goes backwards in the DSE. What is that referring to in this? Well, it's referring to the opinion or the idea. So what is the opinion or the idea if we move back? Not a single word. It is that digital tools can fully replace a guide dog's intuition. That is the opinion or claim that is referring to. So just like this, that here is representing a more complex idea. Another thing that can sometimes refer back to is data, facts, numbers. It's not so common in the DSE that we will see this, but it is possible. So let's look at this example. Alan Wan recalls the peak between 1995 and 2000 when the market generated around 700 million Hong Kong dollars from local comics. By 2010, that figure fell to around 300 million. So in this case, 700 million is that figure. All right, so the first of these difficult or challenging referencing questions come from the pronouns this and that. But they're not the only challenging type of question we can have. One of the really nasty questions that we sometimes get is related to maybe the easiest pronoun, it. It doesn't happen very often, but in some situations, it is used in the same way as this and that to describe a long idea. So let's look at an example. Your theme is the moral argument of your story. It's about how you want your readers to be impacted by the narrative. So in this sentence, if we begin at it and move backwards, we might think that story, the word right before it, could be a suitable substitution. It usually refers to a thing. A story is a thing. Normally, that would match. But if we try and follow that substitution test, it doesn't really work. Stories about how you want your readers to be impacted by the narrative. Doesn't make sense. So it here is talking about the whole idea. The theme being the moral argument of the story. That is the idea that they're getting across here. So it's very, very tricky. Sometimes it can refer to a more complicated, what we call an abstract concept, an idea that is a little bit more complicated than the single word answers we usually have for it. The final kind of more tricky referencing question that we need to talk about are when actually the referencing isn't with a pronoun at all. Actually, a huge number of referencing questions over the years since the DSE began have not used a pronoun. Instead, they've used what we call a noun phrase. They will give you a phrase and they will ask you what this phrase is referring to. Actually, almost 30% of the questions over the years have been this kind of noun phrase referencing. Just as with this and that, and this kind of advanced kind of it, these are usually more common in B2, but we do see them in Part A, and occasionally we see them in B1 as well. So you still need to be aware of them, even if you're aiming for B1. So let's look at some of these examples. In this case, we're looking for the phrase, this challenge. So we are trying to find what challenge is referring to. Actually, this is probably a little bit easier than some of the other ones we've been talking about today. Often when students meet one of these questions, they get quite alarmed or worried because they're expecting to see a pronoun. That's what they've practiced. But actually, these ones here where we have a referencing question which uses a noun instead of a pronoun are actually a little bit easier. Sometimes all we need to do is find a synonym or a definition for that word. So in this case, we have challenge. So we reference it down to blah, blah, blah. Erin Albert regularly challenges her students to write down at least 5 things that are good. Most people can only get to 2 or 3, she says. Overcoming this challenge is the first step to building a portfolio career. So it's a little bit tricky in places, but we follow the same rules as with any other referencing question. This challenge, well, what could that refer to? Which things in this sentence could be a challenge? So if we go back, most people can only get to 2 or 3, maybe. Write down at least 5 things they are good at. And it kind of makes sense, but so get students to write down at least 5 things they are good at. That could be a challenge, couldn't it? And that's the answer. Writing down at least 5 things students are good at, or they are good at. You'd probably get the mark either way. But you get the idea. It's the same process. We're finding the word, thinking about what it means, and just moving back until we find something that fits. Just like with this and that, we're probably looking for a longer section of text. It's probably not going to be 1 word. But with these noun phrases, sometimes it is just 1 word. Let's look at another example. Now in this one, we have quite a tricky item of vocabulary. Stagnation. Now, if you know what stagnation means, great. Maybe you'll be able to answer this question. But I'm sure many of you do not recognize this item of vocabulary. But it shouldn't matter too much. Often these noun phrases, they are just working the same way as these other tasks have worked, and we can apply the same procedures to work out the answer, even if we don't know what this means. So if we look at this, most experts agree that this stagnation will eventually cripple the local economy. So it's probably going to be a negative thing, isn't it? it's probably representing some kind of idea, and it's a negative thing. So let's scan backwards and see what we can find. So most experts, well, that's probably not it. It's in the same sentence. Commuters now face daily delays of over 40 minutes. Maybe. Could be delays. Or the delays is very possible actually. If we go backwards, the government has failed to invest in new transport links. The city's infrastructure is aging rapidly. And so we've got three negative possibilities there. So we've got choices here. We need to decide, is it going to be the government has failed to invest in new transport links or delays? So I'm going to go back to our grammar test or logic test. Which one makes most sense? If I don't know stagnation means, but I think it's probably going to be a bad thing. It's got a shun at the end, T-I-O-N. That probably means it's a noun for an idea. So I would lean towards the government has failed to invest in new transport links. But if you put delays, I wouldn't be too upset. The answer is the government has failed to invest in new transport links. But delays would also be what I call a good wrong answer. It would certainly fit. Anyway, the point of this is it's a challenging task with a challenging item of vocabulary, but we can approach it in exactly the same way that we approach any other referencing question. So let's bring it all together. Some referencing questions are challenging. If we see referencing questions with this or that, they're probably referring to long bits of text, maybe a whole sentence even. This is normally always referring to an idea or a situation. That is often referring to an opinion or some data. But it doesn't matter too much. Just be careful for this and that. Another thing to think about is sometimes, not very often, but sometimes it is used in the same way. It can sometimes refer to a whole idea too. Luckily, it doesn't happen very much in the DSE paper, but it is possible. Another challenge we can have is if we are not given a pronoun to reference, instead we are given a noun phrase. Luckily, a lot of the times these are easier than the pronoun examples because we're just thinking of a synonym. Sometimes the words will be quite difficult. Maybe we don't know what they mean, but if that happens, don't worry. Just follow the same procedure as if we were using a synonym. Try and guess as much as we can about the word and then work backwards and find the options. These very hard questions are usually only found in B2. We do sometimes see them in part A and in part B1 as well. So there we go. Everything you need to know about referencing questions. Until the next video, keep working hard and I wish you all the very best of luck in the preparation for your DSE assessment.